So in the last session, we discussed about change. Basically, we discussed in the last session about logical actions. Then we discussed about business activity. And then we discussed about CR type definition or configuration, CR type configure. Okay. So these are the three things that we discussed. And so in the same CR type config, so once you assign a particular workflow, okay, to any change request type, right? So then for this particular workflow, first we need to define how many steps that we want. I mean, whether it is an auto approval scenario or a two-step approval or one-step approval parallel scenario. So the all that we will do as part of the workflow configuration. So assume that we already configured the workflow for this one, and the result of that particular configuration is we end up having some workflow, some steps. So these steps are nothing but let's take one simple example. So like a requester, and it goes to approver one, and then it goes to approver two. Okay, and then finally something called activation, and the workflow will be completed. Okay, so these are the workflow. Okay, now here we can denote each this box where user action is required. So where user is on foreground submitting something, so those we identify and we say these are your workflow steps. So you can assign some numbers like 0, 1, 2, and 3. So like this, you can assign some numbers. So these numbers, we call it as a workflow steps or CR steps. Both are same. Change request steps are workflow steps. Okay, so we call it this one. So when you are configuring the workflow, once you put this workflow, okay, these many steps I need for this particular to have this two-step approval. So finally, you will end up configuring the steps. And once you configure the steps, for your CR type. So basically you define one CR type. Let me show you. So onwards we'll be discussing about the workflows. But once we finish this configuration, so process modeling, change request, create change request type. So we have our change request type. So that we created, okay, we created ZP11. Before that, to show the demo, I created the UI demo. I created this. Both are for the same. Okay. So for both these change request types, assign these workflows, 40 workflow. So this particular workflow always has these steps like requester approver 1, 2, 3, activation and workflow complete. So the steps are like you have 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now these steps. Okay. So that means now what we wanted to do as a next step for your change from your change request step configuration point of view, at each step, okay, at a requester step or at approver step or approver 2 step, how the behavior should look like. If you have any in the normal case, normal scenario, we don't touch that configuration. But if you have specific requirements where you wanted to manipulate certain fields or certain entities, that's where this particular change request stepwise configuration come into picture. You can see configure properties of change request step. So at each step you can configure. So what are the properties that you can configure at each step? So that is what we are going to learn here. Okay. So this step you need to do for your change request type that you created. Okay. So let's say, for example, we created, these are the two change request types for our custom objects. You can choose any one. And if I go to the steps, so by default, it shows these steps 0, 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now these are the steps and I can take one step at a time. Okay. Select one step at a time and you can go further down and let's explore what are these checks. So here it says checks and enhancement spots. Okay, so what are those checks that we will see? Okay, and here the most important one that you have here is the relevancy, this which is ticked here. Okay, that means if basic, let's say for example, authorization check is there. So this is by default ticked, but I don't want it to perform any authorization check at 00 step. For example, you can untick this. When you untick this, that means basically when I'm creating a material or any custom object using this particular CR type at this particular requester step level, this check won't perform. System doesn't perform this check. Actually, this is a wrong example. Authorization check we wanted to perform irrespective of your requirements. So let's take, for example, another example, validations. Okay, BRF validations. Okay, so this I don't want it to run. So you can untick this one. So which means basically at this level, you can configure the SAP identified broadly categorized all the checks into these 1 to 6. Now you can control this like, okay, at 0 step, what checks you wanted to run. Now let's look at each of these checks. Basic check, first one. So basic check, this relevancy is grayed out, which means this is always ticked. So I cannot untick this one. That means you cannot skip this basic check at any point of time. Okay. Now, what are the different type of basic checks? So when you are creating, let's say, some object, so when you enter some data, like let's say in place of a number that accepts some numbers, but if you enter some character, your standard data element, because in the backend you assigned for that particular field, the data element is number. So if you try to enter some check, system doesn't allow that value. It will throw an error message. It's an invalid value. Or else when there are some mandatory fields are there. So those mandatory fields user has to enter. So that is also some check. So likewise, there are certain basic checks which you cannot actually avoid that has to run irrespective of that. The generic ABAP level checks. So those checks you cannot skip. That's why this is always ticked. Okay. Now let's look at the other checks. Authorization check. So we discussed earlier, authorization checks are like whatever the authorization checks are there in your ECC, the same authorization checks also will get executed in MDG as well. So like if at all I'm creating a material, I should have authorizations of different authorization objects. It will look at plant level, valuation level, and basic data level, sales org level. So different authorization objects are there. So all those authorizations, whether you wanted to validate at requester level or you wanted to skip those authorization checks. So that's where you can take a control. But this never ever untick this one. Keep this authorization checks as also. Okay. Though SAP given it as a editable one where you can untick or tick, but still better to keep it. Okay. Now the next one is duplicate check. So duplicate check is one of the feature that MDG capability, that inbuilt capability in MDG. Okay. So let's at very high level, let me explain what is this duplicate check, but we can discuss in detail in the next topic, the data quality topic. Okay. So in MDG, you have some functionality configuration called duplicate check. Okay. So what do you mean by duplicate check? Can anyone guess what is this? By looking at the name, you can guess it, but I just wanted to hear from you.
It will check for the duplicate entries. So,
Duplicate entries, give some examples.
like if we the key we can give, like if we give the same key, material key same, then it will raise duplicate.
If material, if you're trying to create another material which
material
doesn't
the
exist, which
with
which
exists.
already, yeah, which already exists anyway, the standard itself it won't allow, right? Because the
Yes.
key cannot match. Like you have a material number and you cannot create another material with the same number. That is a standard behavior that comes under your basic check only. Because in a table, you cannot have two records with the same key. So why SAP need to provide this duplicate check explicitly? You got my point?
Yeah.
So certain conditions we need, based on certain field conditions, we need to provide an, okay, before creating the record, we need to provide a pop-up information message to the user. For example, name one, some certain fields matches, then it will give the same name. We have already some records are available. So before user submit the CR, will generate the pop-up as a duplicate.
Yeah. So yeah, that's correct. So basically, key field matching anyway that will be taken care by your standard at ABAP layer. Technically, it will take care. Okay. Now this duplicate check is, let's say for example, I go to some, let me open, let's go to some customer governance, search customer. So you get some customer list when you try to search here. So okay. So let me click on search. Now you got some customers over here. Okay. So some customer technologies is there. There is something Abhijit industry is there. Okay. So these are the different customers. Now assume that there is a customer here. Let's say for example, Vinayaka, Ricky customer, something like that. Okay. Now this is the best example. Look at this, Lenovo. Okay. So there is a customer already, Lenovo. Now I don't know this customer Lenovo is already existing in the system and the customer ID is 31. So I don't know. So what I want, I'm doing some business with the same Lenovo customer. So what I can do, basically, people will actually go to create ERP customer and they'll directly create a Lenovo customer, which already existing, but still you are going to create a new customer. You are going to set up a new customer. Okay, that might have some number 100. So for the same Lenovo, in the system, you have two customer numbers. One is 31, other one is 100. Okay, so that means it's a duplicate record. Technically, if you look at the customer numbers are different. That's why system created two customers. But the other properties, right? So like the description, maybe here someone entered Lenovo China, someone entered just Lenovo. Okay, so likewise, when you are trying to create any master data in the system, okay, that is the reason SAP also provided, if you go to this customer governance, they didn't provide directly create customer link here. The reason is you always go to search customer application. Okay, so as per the governance principle, it says search before create, which means first, at least SAP making mandatory that you should navigate to search application. They recommend to search maybe with some name that you are trying to create. Okay, if that customer maybe exist, you can use the existing customer. Don't set up a duplicate record. That is a manual search basically. Okay, but still the user can skip that process and he can, without searching directly, can create the same customer in the system. Maybe this time you'll enter some other details. So system will generate a new customer ID. So that means for the same customer, you have two records in the system, which is actually a duplicate. Okay. So sometimes this duplicate creation is required because of some geographical reasons. You need to have two customers in the system, but sometimes we wanted to have one single customer. Okay, so that's why, though SAP provided or making you to navigate to such application, user may search or may not search. That's why there should be another systematic check in the backend that should happen. Okay, that check should happen based on, let's say, when I'm trying to create a customer, if I enter the name, address or something, then system will go and check with these names, the details that I provided, I inputted, are there any existing records in the system? If there are any existing records are there, it will pop up me that, okay, these are with the data that you entered. So these are the matching records. So these are the matching records. Now it's up to the business user to take a call whether he wants to continue the new creation or he can switch back to the existing customer. Okay, but there should be some systematic check as well. It should happen. Okay, so that's where this duplicate check criteria, SAP come up with this duplicate check functionality. So this duplicate check functionality, you can configure for your material master. You can configure for your BP, plus you can configure this for your BP, customer and vendor. Okay, and you can also configure it for your finance objects if it makes sense. You can also create this for article master, for all the masters, the duplicate or EM objects, and even for your custom objects as well. Okay, so you can configure this duplicate check. So if you know how to create a duplicate check configuration and enable it for an object, you need to follow the same steps for other objects as well. So this we will discuss as part of data quality topic. We have a topic called data quality. There we will discuss. Okay, so if I go back, okay, under data quality topic, we have duplicate check configuration. Duplicate check configuration. This we will discuss over here. Now, why we are talking about that point here is, assume that you already configured the duplicate check there. Okay, now the require here, at what step I wanted to run the duplicate check. Okay, you have that flexibility. Okay, so that means whether I wanted to run the duplicate check at 00 step or 01 step or 02 step or 03 step or at all the places. Okay, so that means here you can run the duplicate check here, you can run it here, or you can run it here or here as well. Okay, so that is up to you. Okay, it's a configurable one, or else you can always say that, okay, better to run the duplicate check at this level only, not at this level. Okay, so that kind of call you can take it. So, but usually what we prefer is, don't run the duplicate check at all the steps. Among all these steps, identify a step where all the required data is available. Because let's say if I run the duplicate check at the requester level, maybe you made some attributes as optional because the requester may not enter, Okay, in that case, and you make those attributes as mandatory at approver 1. So even though if you run the duplicate check at this level, though if those attributes are not filled because it's an optional attributes, you may not get the right duplicate records. But if I run that, if I know at approver 1 level, all the attributes are mandatory, which are required to perform a duplicate check. And once user enter all those values, then if I run the duplicate check, I will get an exact result. So that's the reason SAP made it as a configurable item. So at 0 step level, you can go, and at this level, we are not talking about how to configure the duplicate check. That is already part of DQ topic. Here, once if you configure the duplicate check over there, whether you wanted to run the duplicate check at this step level or at next step level, that you can take a call. Either you can keep it enable or you can disable this at this step level. Okay. Now you also have another option here. You can see whether this check, okay, if it is ticked. Okay. Now here you have two options. Always execute when data changes. Okay. So this means always execute means what happens is, let me show you here. Okay. So this is my customer record. Okay. Now my duplicate criteria is, okay. So if name 1 and name 2 is matching, then I wanted to trigger the duplicate check and find if there are any duplicates are there. Name 1 and name 2. This is what my duplicate check configuration. Okay. Now what happens? You entered name 1 and name 2. Then system will perform duplicate check and it will tell you, okay, whether it's a duplicate record or not, which is fine. That is activity is done. After that, you continue to update other attributes. So in that case, whether you wanted to run the duplicate check or not. So if you select always execute here, okay, that means irrespective of attributes that you are modifying, though those attributes are not part of your duplicate criteria, system will go and perform duplicate check again and again until you enter all this data. Okay. Other option is you have execute when data changes, which indicates duplicate check will get executed only if any of these two attributes get changed. So that's why by default, the option is execute when data changes, because I wanted to run my duplicate check only when the underlying parameters of that configuration gets changed. I don't want to run duplicate check for all other attributes because those are not part of my duplicate criteria. And that will be an additional unnecessary call back to your database, unnecessary hits to your database, because in the backend it performs file select statements, right? So that's why usually we prefer, by default, the setting is execute when data changes only. Okay. And for all other things, the setting is always execute. So you do run your validations all the time, your baddie validations run all the time. So all those things will run all the time. Okay. So here you can take duplicate check. By default at 0 step, it is unticked. At next level, it will be ticked, but you can actually select here as well if you want. Okay. This is one thing. The next one is validation rules and baddie validation. So as part of the same data quality topic, which I showed some time back, right? So we will be discussing how to configure duplicate check. We will be discussing how to configure validations. Okay. Validations. Again, in case of validations, there are two type of validations are there. One is baddie validations. The other one is BRF validations. Okay. So now these are the validations that you are going to set up at MDG level when you are creating a master data. In addition to whatever you have SPRO and other standard validations, these are custom business specific validations that you can actually configure. Okay. Now here this says, okay, you already configured that BRF validations and baddie validations. Now whether you wanted to run those validations at this step or not. So that also you can take a call. Okay. Now after that, existence check. So existence check is something like what happens is this existence check. Let me show you in material master. Multiple active data models triggered exception condition. Why? What happened? Did anyone touch MDG data model? Sorry, data model.
No, didn't touch.
Same. Why we are getting this? Did anyone used 194 OTC for any of your data models? That's the issue. Someone actually assigned 194 for their data model. Okay, so because this is yesterday it was working fine, right? So 11. So let me look at this Y2 because I told someone copied Y2 data, data model. Someone copied this data model. That's what I clearly mentioned. Don't touch this data model. So 194 is being used here. Who did this Y2? Who is this? Any idea? Who is
Not
this?
for our team, this is not for
It
CS,
is not
maybe
for
some
our
other.
users. It is not our user.
Okay,
Correct.
okay, fine. So what I'll do is let me
Deactivate.
I'll delete that one. Okay, so maybe I need to activate it. That's the issue. You see, it's the same OTC is assigned, right? So that's why we are getting this error. Let's see. I need to activate the data model. Looks like. Let me delete extension MDG for material mention type. Okay. Let me delete this data model itself. So there is a program which you can actually delete the data model, but don't use it for the standard ones. Star USMD delete. Change request, C request, this one. USMD delete data model. What is this data model? Y2. Okay, fine. Okay, this is deleted. It says, let me check it here. Why it is still showing? Okay, it shows it as an active version, which is fine. This is also fine. Now let me, okay. So why I opened this material creation is because we are talking about here existence check. So existence check is basically what happens is in this one, let's say for example, material type. So when you do F4, usually you need to enter the material type which is available as part of this list. Okay, the available material types from F4. If I enter any random value, let's say ZXY, okay, and if I try to click on check, I'll get an error message. This material type does not exist, this ZXY, because it is performing in the backend validation foreign key check in the backend config table, right? So that is a kind of existence check. So I wanted to bypass this check. This check I wanted to bypass temporarily, and because as part of my input as a requester, I have to maintain this value, but this value can be changed at the later at the requester level or approver level. Okay, if this can be changed at approver level, for now I should be able to submit it, but now here what happens is because of this check I cannot submit the request. So that's why I wanted to bypass this check. So in this case, if you untick this one, right, existence check, system doesn't validate whether this value exists in the backend table or not. Okay, again, whatever you are unticking, that means you are bypassing the checks. It can be your BRF or baddie or duplicate or anything. Ensure these checks will happen at the later stage. That means you cannot keep untick this at all the workflow levels. It requester, approver, and all the levels. Again, it validate at your activation step, it will get failed because system will perform on the during your activation time, and if that value does not exist, your activation will get failed. Okay, so that's why it gives a provision temporarily. Either you can skip at this level or few you can skip at this level, but ensure at the last step everything has to be, all the checks has to be, it should go through all the checks. That's what our governance. If you are bypassing everything, there is no point in governance, right? So that's why this existence check is whether that value exists or not. That is the kind of check that it will happen. Okay. Now the next, reuse area check. So this reuse area check is also, if you remember when we discussed about reuse mode. Okay. So this is your MDG layer and this is your ERP layer. Okay, here you do a lot of configuration under SPRO. Okay, now when you are creating any master data using MDG, it will go and validate whether the entered data is as per this SPRO configuration or not. Okay, it will check, and if something is not as part of this one, you will get an error message on the UI. Okay, now how this happens, because you have in the backend access class or active area. So access class, technically this access class will perform all the required authorizations, checks or config checks and everything underlying in the underlying ERP, and it will give you the response here. Okay, now this reuse area checks, that means the underlying ERP checks also will be performed from your MDG UI. Okay, if those underlying UI checks you wanted to bypass, then again you can untick this. Reuse area check means your underlying SPRO configuration checks, so that you can bypass over here if you untick this one. Okay, is this clear to all? What is this checks?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Can you repeat?
So reuse area is Like in ERP also, it will validate a few stuff that in your SPRO, underlying SPRO. When I'm extending, let's say, for example, I'll give you one example. Let me show you here some checks. I go to SPRO. So basically, when you create a material using MM01, so that system in MM01, it will validate. If you trying to create a material using MM01 in ERP layer, it will perform certain validations. All the validations has to be passed to create a material using MM01. So those validations, basically, it can be your number range check, or it can be like your material type checks, or it can be any other checks, whatever is there part of SPRO. Okay, so those checks will be performed when you are creating a material using MM01. Okay, now when I'm creating a material using my MDG as well, the same checks will perform here. Then only it should behave like how you are creating material using MM01. The same check should run from here as well. We don't want it to run different set of checks here. So in that case, your MDG also should go and check the underlying SPRO checks. So whatever the checks that it is performing with respect to this, those checks we call it as a reuse area checks. Reuse area checks. Okay. So I'll give you a few examples what kind of checks that it will be, like your material type, number range checks and everything. Along with that one, you can see under logistics general, material master, let's say basic settings. Okay. Material number, material type checks. Okay. You can see some define some, these are also different type of checks. Like it can be configurable. So like all these are the your different message. If validity date is in the past, okay, our price unit is not allowed since valuation price would be 0. So these are the checks that happens in the backend by standard. Now all these checks will also perform from MDG. Now you wanted to bypass some of these checks, then you can actually untick this one. But ideally, I'll tell you. So in general, we keep everything. Only the BRF or your baddie validations, maybe we will untick. The rest, everything from the standard, we wanted to keep it. But you have a flexibility to configure these checks here. Does it make sense? Clear? So now there is something called sequence also. You can see here. For all the checks, they put sequence 0. Okay. Only for duplicate check, it is 99.
Hey, you know, ZaranTech now offers SAP corporate training. That's right. Train your workforce in SAP with our comprehensive program. We offer customized courses, certified trainers, and hands-on labs for both individuals and businesses. Our standout features: bespoke training, fully configured servers for practice, in-house materials, and a dedicated LMS. Plus, get session recordings and 24/7 support. From functional to technical modules, we have got it all. Choose ZaranTech for SAP training and watch your team excel. Learn, upskill, succeed with ZaranTech.
Any reason can you think of? Basically, this sequence is in what sequence this check should perform. So that means here, all other checks will run at same time. And after that, a duplicate check will run. The sequence is 99, right? So before less than 99, all the checks will perform, like all with zeros. This will be the last check that it performs. After all these things, the last check is duplicate check. Why SAP intentionally put duplicate check at last? Any guess?
Maybe if we have any furthermore checks for the sequence, it should be the last one.
Yeah, it should be the last one. Why?
Maybe in the meantime we can change, right? It can be till the last reviewer, like the final step.
No. It is within the same step, at requester step only. This, because all this cannot run parallel, right? One after other, it will get executed. So in that sequence, SAP provided a sequence, okay, and they ensured that this duplicate check runs in the last in the list, okay. So yeah, someone mentioned like a always duplicate check should be the last one. Why? Because I'll give you one example. So you have a, let's say for example, name 1, name 2 are there. Okay. Now your duplicate, you when you are configuring the duplicate check, you need to configure your duplicate condition. The condition is it should let's say name 1 plus name 2. Okay. So name 1 plus and name 2 it should take and go and validate in your database with this combination. Are there any other records are there? That is a duplicate criteria. Okay. So all the matching records with name 1 and name 2 should consider it as a duplicate records. Now, but name to is optional. Okay, so that means assume that if user, but optional in the sense from the standard. Okay, but in your organization, because name one and name two part of the duplicate check, you written a validation. You written a validation here using BADI validation or BRF validation, saying that if name two is not filled, then throw an error message. That means if the validation says name two is a mandatory one, assume that. Okay, so that means if my validation runs, if my validation, this validation BADI or this one if runs, that will ensure that the name two is filled. After that, if I run the duplicate check, then I will have the proper values. So that's why first let all your other checks will get executed and finally run the duplicate check, so that after duplicate check, there is no further checks. So that means I assume by this time, all the checks, validations, everything is done and it is good to go. And I need to only run the duplicate check on the data that exists on the UI. Reason clear?
So now which checks will be considered? Like now it will take it from SPRO when we are running the final duplicate check. Because in BADI we are already checking whether this name one is matching with the data existing in the active table.
No. This BADI validation and BRF validation will ensure name two is filled or not.
Okay, only filled.
Yeah. Okay. Your duplicate check, what it will do, when you are configuring a duplicate check for material master, the duplicate criteria rule is if match with whatever user I entered here in the AA and BB. So the duplicate check configuration, what it does basically, when you configure the duplicate check, you configure it as name one, name two. If name one and name two matches, it's a duplicate record. That means what happens? System will take this value, name one value, name two value, and it will start looking into your database table. So that is your part of duplicate check criteria execution. But before that, we wanted to ensure name two value is there and name one value is there. So what I mentioned is in the BADI or BRF validation, we will ensure whether all this data is filled or not. And then this will ensure, it will identify if there are any duplicates are there based on these values. Clear? Is that clear?
Okay.
Any confusion?
Generally in validation, in BADI validations also we write this kind of validations. So in normal, other than MDG, wherever we have a BADI.
Okay, what you are saying is I can run this duplicate check in BADI
level also.
In the BADI level as well. Why I need to configure in the duplicate check? Okay. Yeah, I'll tell you that one. Okay. So you written in your BADI, the logic is name one and name two, which is fine. You hard coded name one and name two and you written the logic. Okay. First thing is that BADI logic will get executed all the time, right? Or else you will write some condition hard coded. If at requester, if the workflow step is equal to request approver, then only run this kind of thing. Okay. And later if your condition gets changed, this should get executed not at the requester level. It should get executed at approver level. Then you need to again change your logic coding, right? Again, you need to change that one. That is one thing. The other one is assume that if business added name 3 as a new field, okay. Now again, when you are capturing name, in this case, it name 1, name 2, name 3 matches, then you need to run the duplicate check. I mean, you can run the duplicate check based on these 3 parameters. This time your condition got changed. Again, you need to do code changes. So instead of that one, if I'm able to configure the same thing using some configuration, right? And also when you write a select statement, what happens? That will be a select statement. If you are on HANA system will perform these checks on by using CDS views. It will generate in the backend the required CDS views and everything when you do the duplicate check configuration, right? So the performance will be faster. So in all aspects, always we need to do less in terms of coding and more in terms of the configuration. So that's why SAP provided this duplicate check as a configurable item, not as a dev item, so that functional also can configure. There is no need to write any code, right? Functional can go to duplicate check configuration. They can define their match profiles and they can activate the duplicate check without writing zero code. Okay. And even if your condition got getting changed, then also you can add in the configuration, no development effort. Okay. If your sequence got changed, sequence in the sense instead of request or approval level or somewhere, that is also config activity. So that's why SAP made it as a configurable item. It's very flexible. That's why we wanted to avoid coding and keep it as a configurable item. So those validations you can write on top of that one certain validations you can achieve through coding, but few things which you can achieve it through the configuration, so that like functionals or even business, anyone can do their configurations. That is the reason. Is that clear?
Okay, you mean to say like if the body definition, the filter values or something should be hard coded to do it at a step level.
Yeah.
But here the duplicate check is already available in the step level itself. So this is a configurable action. That's what you.
Yeah. So always see, there can be two ways. You can achieve something through coding. You can achieve through configurations as well. So what do you give? I mean, for which one you give the preference? Usually we give the preference to the configuration through config, because that eliminates the development effort, right? So that's the thing.
Okay, thanks, sir.
Okay, fine. So now, so this is about the sequencing part. Okay. So why all this 0 and this is 99? What about in between? In between, right? So you can, there is something called enrichment spot. Okay. So that means if I do drop down, you can see more other checks as well. Okay. So these are like, let's say, for example, enrichment spots. We call it as an enrichment spot, which means you have a requirement. Let me show you. So this is my system, MDG system. Okay. So user logged into the system and he is trying to create a customer. When he's entering the customer data, okay. So what happens in the backend? You configure a lot of checks and derivations in MDG layer using some bad A's or BRF, using all that stuff. You did a lot of configurations in the system. What are the checks and validations that I have to perform when user is creating the any master data? Some checks from SPRO also. So this we call it as a reuse checks. Okay. So when someone is creating business, is creating a customer, all this data will go through these checks, and the same data will go through these checks. And so after that, finally, if there are no errors are there, so the data will be set up or created in your system, which is fine. But sometimes now these are like your internal checks. Internal checks means within the system you are configuring all the checks. But let's take example, you have certain validation or some derivation. Okay. So there is a separate third party system is there. Okay. Now, as soon as when I'm creating some customer in this one, it has to connect to this particular system and do some validation over there and send me the response back, which we call it as a external derivations or external checks or derivations. Okay. So it's not necessarily all the time same system. It should be, maybe the checks can happen in some other system as well. You will pass some input and it will provide you the output. It can be success or failure or some derivation, right? So those kind of things we call it as a external derivations or enrichments, external enrichments. Okay. So for this one, there is a framework, enrichment spot. Okay. So there's a framework in MDG. We will discuss. This is also part of your data quality topic only. Okay. So that during that time, I'll explain what is this one. But assume that you configured this kind of external enrichments. Okay. Now this check also we wanted to run. Okay. Which is some custom check, right? So that means you will configure that and you wanted to add that external enrichment as well over here. So when you add that external enrichment as another row over here, that means you need to provide some sequence to that one. The sequence should be that you are going to assign the sequence, right? For your external enrichment or new row here, it should be always greater than 0 and it should be always less than 99. It should be between 0 to 99. That means system wants to ensure that these standard checks should run first. That is the first check, the standard. Maybe after that, if there are any external enrichments with the sequence number 1 to up to 98, and the final check should be duplicate check. So that's why the sequence, they already utilize these numbers 00 and 99. So when you are adding a new check over here, that should probably, you can give 90, 91, 92, something like that. That's why this sequence plays an important role. Clear? Okay. So the next one, you have something called message out. Now here, I wanted to, when you see here standard, so message output means generally when you add some validations, you will throw some error messages, right? So you categorize it as an error or warning or success message. So the same. So here what happens is, when you say here standard, let's say for example, BRF validation is there. When you specify here standard, that means from the BRF validation, if you are throwing some error messages, it will show as is. If you throw error, it will show it as an error. If you throw it as a warning, it will show it as a warning message. Now the requirement is I wanted to run the check setup, all the checks that I configured as a BRF, but I wanted to run this check, but it shouldn't be an blocker for the requester. Requester should be able to continue. In that case, if I keep standard, what happens is it will throw an error message as error. The user cannot submit the request. But if I convert that error message into warning messages, the user should be able to submit that request. So this is also way of bypassing. The earlier approach is don't run the checks at all. This approach is run the checks, but don't block the user. That means the only way that you can unblock the user is by converting the error to warning messages. Okay. I'm not going to change anything. So let me come out of this. So for this one, go to change request type 00. Okay. So we discussed about all these checks: sequence, message output, relevancy, and execution. Okay. Now, whatever we see here, this is at the entire object level, which means if you are bypassing a particular check here, that means you have one data model. Let's say, for example, data model with SU type 1 and with SU type 4, again another SU type 4 and another SU type 4. Okay, so when you say here run the validations or BADI validations or BRF validations, that indicates that what are the validations you configured for this entity, for this entity, for this entity, for this entity, which means at the entire data model level or for all the underlying entities, all these checks will be performed. Okay, it is at the object level. Okay, but my requirement is I wanted to run the BRF validations for all the entities except this particular entity. For this entity, I wanted to skip the BRF validation. For the remaining ones, I wanted to run. So that means if you untick here, that means it won't perform at all these levels. But your requirement is run the checks all the levels except this entity. So in this case, the similar kind of configuration you can do at the entity level as well. If I go further down, okay, for our data model, there are two entities are there. Okay, now for the two entities, here you can see standard. Standard means not, so this one, check logic. So check logic here, what it says, all configured type of checks. That means for this one and for this one, whatever you configured under BRF, BADI, your reuse area checks, everything will get executed, all configured checks. All configured means in the above, whatever we discussed, basic checks, authorization checks, and then BRF, BADI, reuse area checks, duplicate check, everything will get executed. All configured type of check means if you put here basic check, that means for this entity, for the selected entity, only the basic check. Basic check is nothing but the first one. Only run first one and ignore all other checks. That means at the entity type level as well, for each individual entity also you can configure. Okay, so this is about the checks. Sorry,
The question is like in the drop down we have only basic check, right? Not the other checks like
no,
existence
you
check
cannot
and all.
choose. It will be either all or only basic. Here you cannot choose like BRF, BADI and all that stuff. Either if you are told you wanted to run all, keep it here, or only basic check, select this one. That's it. Okay, so the next one is, this is about the what type of checks. So from the above list, from the superset, either you can run all the checks or only one check, basic check. Now coming back to the field, this is field properties. Okay, for field properties means basically here what standard means as is. When you specify not relevant, means this entity data on the UIBB, whatever that your plant UIBB or whatever the UIBB corresponding to this one, that entire UIBB will become read only at 00 step level. So you might be having some requirement. Maybe this particular bank data should not be edited by requester. It should be only approver should have that authorization to edit the data. Then at 00 step level, identify your bank entity, one or multiple, and specify here not relevant. That means when you specify not relevant, that entire UIBB will become read only. The requester cannot edit that data. Okay, and you have no required field check. That means If you have written any validations or anything, right? So that will get ignored. If you have written any validations for those fields, those also will get ignored if you do like this. It will be editable, but it won't run any checks for those attributes. So there are a lot of options are there at multiple places. So I know it will take some time for you to consume this information, but you navigate, go through all this step-by-step configuration. You will actually understand this. Okay. So we have seen it entire object level at an individual entity type level. Now under this particular entity also, I wanted to bypass only for few attributes, not for all. When you specify here, this will be applicable for all the attributes under this entity. But if you can control this at the attribute level as well. Okay. Now here what happens? Now you are at the lowest level. Okay. And under a particular entity, you are at the attribute level. So you can again the same thing. Here you have only limited option. That is, if at all a particular attribute you wanted to exclude or make it read only, you can choose not relevant. If you select this no required field check, there won't be any validations happens for that particular field. When you specify standard, it is as is. That means whatever the above configurations are there, it will respect those configurations. So these are all the things that I wanted to, because sometimes what happens is some of the requirements you can actually you can achieve by doing some configurations here itself. Okay. No, there is no need to do any development or coding for this one. Okay. Now, whatever you are doing, all these things, it is for the 0 step. Now you need to repeat the same. Depends on your requirement. You can choose the other next step, go back again, repeat the same thing here as well. Depends on at this step level, how the behavior should look like. That's why I said this configuration talks about how your behavior, the object behavior should look like, whether check should run at this level or not. Then duplicate check should run at this level or not. Authorization check should run at this level or not. Do I need to take this attribute or entity at this step level, make it everything read only? So all the behavior you can control over here. Okay. Any questions? So if you are clear with this, the last one here you have is something called UI interface. So here again, what happens? You can configure, you can create for the same UI application, you can create different configurations. Like you can create multiple UI configurations, just like we created, right? So one UI configuration, basically with one UIBB, another UI configuration with two UIBBs. So likewise, you can create multiple, and at each step, what configuration you wanted to call, that you can configure over here. But we don't actually use this configuration at all. And the same, because here you need to end up creating multiple configurations. Okay. But the similar kind of requirement can be achieved. You have a requirement at requester level. I wanted to show only 4 UIBBs. I wanted to hide some sensitive information or some UIBB which contains the sensitive information. At approver level, I wanted to show all. So how do you control that? Based on your workflow step, you wanted to show some UIBBs and hide some information. One is this approach, but here the limitation is you need to create those many configurations in the system. But with one single configuration, how can I achieve that? Any
Via
idea?
configurable property, right?
Via? Yep, no problem. I mean, even if
Context-based-
that is wrong also, that's fine. Absolutely no issues. Just try
Context-based
to.
adaptation, yeah, based on the context-based adaptation
Exactly.
or else
No,
property.
exactly. Yeah, using context-based adaptation only. So in the context-based adaptation, so you have a workflow step as one of the parameter. I'll show you.
Step type is one of the parameter, correct?
Yeah. So CR step as one of the parameter in the context-based adaptation. Okay. Here what you can do. So this is your CR step. You create one adaptation with 0 step, select that adaptation and remove unwanted UIBBs. Similarly, add one more step, maybe approval step 1. And add the required UIB. So likewise, you can achieve within one single configuration only, you can create multiple within that. Okay. So this will be easy. So everyone will prefer this one. Okay. This is actually not a good place to handle this, but the purpose is that, okay. After that, you have some other checkbox here. HC means highlight changes. Okay. Highlight changes means highlight changes. Okay. So that means I'll show you. What is that? So if you look at here, whenever some value get populated, that particular field get highlighted with this color. So let me enter material type. Okay. So that means basically highlight changes when you enable this checkbox at a particular step. Okay. So what happens is system will highlight whenever you're trying to in create scenario or change scenario. When you are trying to enter some change some value, automatically it will highlight with that different color. Okay. So that feature is there. Now with this one, you just tell me any use with this approach. With this highlighting this color, do you see any added advantage?
Can easily
Yes,
identify,
what are
right,
the
which
field
field
changes?
change.
Exactly. So maybe in create scenario or change, especially in change scenario, if user modified the request or modified somewhere around in the down some plant or some value. Okay, it's a OVP application. There are hundreds of attributes are there here. It will be very difficult for the approver to see exactly what change made as part of this request, CR request. If that is highlighted with this color, it will be easy for the approver to go and validate that attribute. And when you put your cursor over here, it also shows that, okay, now what does that here? The change log also it shows. Earlier it is empty, blank. Now that blank changed to FERT. Someone entered FERT. So it also gives what is your old value and new value. So that you can make use of this particular feature highlight changes. Okay. So this is all about the stepwise configuration. So whenever you configure your change request and then you define the number of steps for your change request, workflow steps for your change request, and you configure your workflow, then you will see those steps over here and you can do the stepwise configuration here. Any questions on this?
No.
Okay. So you all are clear with this configuration, right? What we do under this change request step properties configuration. Okay, fine. If this is done, then there are few small configurations are there. Let's look at this. So there is something called define priorities for change request. So which means if you go to this, let's say there are certain priorities defined over here. 1, 2, 3. So generic priorities that are in your as per your business standards. 1 main indicates very high priority, 2 indicates high, 3 medium and low. Okay. So now here, okay. So when you configure your change request, okay. So this is your change request which we configured. Okay. There is something called service level agreements here. Okay. Now in this one, you can basically click on new entry and whatever the priorities that you defined over there, right? So that you can mention, okay, 0, 1 indicates high, very high priority. But what is the SLA? Whether it is 12 half days or 1 day. So that kind of SLAs you can provide over here. Okay. So you can provide these kind of SLAs over here.
Then where we will configure after this?
I'll show you. So once you define the SLAs for your change request type, I'm specifying here depends on the priority. I'm assigning the SLA that days. Okay. And you save this configuration. So once you define the SLAs here, then let's go to the UI application, custom model create, which CR type we defined that SLA ZP01 first one. Okay. You can see the priority here, very high, high, medium, low. Okay. When I choose very high, that means this change request has to be approved and closed, or basically it has to be actioned within these many days. Okay. So that kind of information also you can provide. Basically, you are assigning some urgency or SLA for each of these requests. That's the thing. Okay. That doesn't mean that basically the request, it automatically will be taken care. So what we are saying is this is a very high priority request. I'm assigning the priority. That's it. It can approve it within that SLA or it can get approved at 2 days or within 3 days. That is approver, or maybe depends on their availability, they do that. But how it will impact is there are certain reports are there, analytical reports. So when I open that analytical report, system will show up that how many requests met SLA, how many does not meet SLA. So there is a report available in Fury. When we are talking about the Fury applications, I'll show you. There you can see, okay, these many requests met SLA, these miss the SLA. Okay. Now on what basis it is calculating the SLA? Because here we are specifying for 674 change request number. Very high is the priority, which means it has to be approved within that day. Now system will calculate when it was created and when it was final approved. In between, how many number of days are there? If it is less than a day, it will consider it as a met SLA. If it is more than 1 day, it will consider it as a does not met SLA. So for that reporting purpose, this will be helpful. Okay. If business has certain requirement, that's it.
So that will be only reporting purpose.
Yeah, only for reporting purpose.
So no need to mention any workflow configuration or somewhere else not required.
No, it's only for reporting purpose only. Nothing at the workflow level. Okay. At workflow level, if that doesn't meet our SLA, you wanted to auto reject that request or something like that, because we don't wanted to keep that the material or the object assigned locked under that CR for longer duration. Then in that case, you need to write some custom logic in the workflow to automatically reject that your CR. So that logic you have to write it. That's a different thing. But how many requests are meeting SLA, how many of them not meeting SLA? These kind of reports are needed by some stewards or some the management or some leadership, right? So for that one, these SLAs will helpful.
Yeah, but workflow also we have one of the column is right. That's the reason I am asking, highlighting this point. Is there any linking between here and there?
No, nothing. That will be basically to take some action. Depends on that. You can actually make use of that column in the BRF workflow. We'll discuss during that time, workflow time. But this is from your change request, whatever the priorities I explained. This is from the as an to the analytical reporting point of view only, nothing much. Okay. So next one is define reasons for change request. So that means when you are creating a change request, right? So there are certain reasons you can maintain over here. Let's say, for example, maybe in the business use cases, when someone is creating a material or some supplier, what are the reasons are there? So why you are creating? Maybe is it a new business expansion or is it something else? So like you can get all the valid reasons from business and you can configure for this particular change request type, what are the reasons? So you can see for all the for material, how many reasons they mentioned? 1, 2, 3. New business, business change, legal change, and miscellaneous. So now if I use this one, the change request, here it shows that business change, legal change, miscellaneous, new business. So all these are coming because these reasons are maintained against this particular change request type. Okay. So then you have something called reasons for rejection. That means similarly, when you are when you are creating the request, when someone is rejecting that particular change request, they wanted to mention why you are rejecting the request. Maybe insufficient information, wrong bank data, or maybe address data is not correct. So something like that. Any reasons that you wanted to mention while rejecting the request, you can actually maintain all the valid reasons. Same change request type, you can provide your reason. Maybe due to duplicate check, duplicate record, I wanted to cancel some legal or some miscellaneous, something like that. But this will be during your rejection time. When you're rejecting, you get a pop-up. In the pop-up, you need to choose the reasons. Okay. And you can select the reason and reject that request. Okay. So this is about to reject. It's just a kind of maintaining some. You will collect all the from the business only. Functional also can do all this maintenance. Okay. So it's just simply maintain over here for your change request type so that those user can choose when they are creating the requests. Okay. Now, after this, the next one, you have something like a print form. So we actually don't use much because in older versions, older UI applications, there is no print option. But with the OVP application,
What sets ZaranTech apart in SAP corporate training? It's our unique blend of expertise and innovation. We offer customized courses tailored to each client's needs, ensuring relevant, targeted learning. Our vast trainer database brings you wisdom from the best in the field. Need resources? Access our extensive training material repository anytime. We are all about measurable results, providing detailed student metrics to track progress. And we don't just teach, we build community. Join our thriving social media network, connecting learners beyond boundaries. With ZaranTech, you are not just training, you are transforming your SAP expertise.
with the OVP application, SAP already come up with this a kind of print option over here. Okay. So where if someone wants to take a printout over here, or else if at all you wanted to, if someone actually want to configure a specific print format, you can actually maintain over here. PDF form based prints you can actually maintain over here. But this actually, we don't use this configuration at all. At least I never use this configuration in last 10 years. Okay. But these are important, like all these reasons and everything. It's a one-time activity you can collect from the business and maintain all the details. So any questions so far? Okay. So if this is clear, so the next one is change request archiving. So this particular archiving is in MDG. I wanted to give some background. We are always talking about three type of tables in MDG. Okay. So, okay. One is staging tables. What is the other tables?
Active table.
Active area tables. Good. Okay. The third set we are talking about CR related tables, CR tables. Okay. Which means we know what gets stored into the active area tables. What will get stored into active area tables?
Yeah, active data once it is.
Sorry, can you come again?
Yeah.
Voice is-
Once the activation process is done, like the final activation, the data will be stored in the active area tables.
So that data is nothing but your master data, right?
Master data.
Master data, like it can be your customer data, vendor
Supplier.
data, supplier purchase material data. Yeah. So in staging,
Like before activation, the data, the inactive data we can say.
again, this
Staging
is also
data.
master data,
Master
but
data.
inactive data, right? Now we are talking about CR data. What is this CR data is? Now, did you think about any time when you're creating a change request, right? So it generates this number. So where this data gets stored, the change request status, this, what is your the current status created on, the description of your CR or whatever the priorities you maintain for the CR. So basically, you see there is a CR related UIBB is there, some information is there, some notes is there, some attachments is there. So where this data gets stored? Definitely not in your staging table and not in active area table, right? That data we call all those tables are nothing but your CR tables. All these CR tables starts with USMD star. Okay. Now, one of the important table in this one is USMD 120C. This is the parent table. Whenever you create any change request, that change request can be your MM or BP, finance, custom or anything. Whenever system generates one change request number here, this data gets stored into this table. Okay. If you look at this table, it will store your change request information. What is the type of the change request? What is the status of the change request? The description, okay, and the timestamp created by, and your priority, due date, reason, rejection reasons, all that stuff, everything gets stored over here. This is a master table for your change request information. So if I open this, okay, if when you run this, you will find all different type of material. CR information also gets stored here. Supplier one also, even our custom Z, whatever we created day before the Z, that also gets stored over here. The custom one, everything. So this is the master table for all your change request related information. Okay. Now here, so you set up MDG, implemented MDG at customer location, and the customer started using this MDG for your master data. So day in, day out, there are multiple CRs are getting created, thousands of CRs are getting created. Okay. And over a period, okay, what happens after 10 years, 15 years, this size of this table will grow in such a way that huge entries will get added into this table, right? Now, then after that, you will see some system when it is picking up in the standard CR process. So the standard MDG processes will try to read the data from this 120 table to perform some activity and all that stuff. So during that time, you will see it starts dumping because of the size of the table, or you will see some slowness on the performance. So everything you will start seeing. So that means that's where actually you need to start thinking about enabling the archiving. Okay. Again, we don't need to work anything on with respect to archiving. There will be a separate archiving team who will enable that archiving jobs and everything. Okay. First, we need to understand the importance of archiving. Okay, so that's why this archiving come into picture. And this archiving, whatever you see, this archiving, that is for your USMD tables. That means it's not only one single table where the data gets inserted. This is one of the primary table. Along with that one, there are some bunch of tables where some child information gets stored. Okay, so now what are those tables? I'll show you. Okay, you can find the list of tables that will be scope of this archiving. Okay, so the main one is 120C. Similarly, whenever you make some notes for every CR, I can make some notes here. Okay, I can click on this new, maintain some notes, again click on, okay, likewise you can maintain some notes, right? This information gets stored into this notes section. Similarly, your attachments data gets stored into this one. Okay, all this is for your specific change request. Okay, now in addition to this one, this data also, the data also gets stored into the respective tables. Now that's where actually archiving is required. Okay. Now what is our scope? MDG consultant scope here is you need to work with business. Okay. And open this configuration. What is the rest time? Rest time means basically you are creating or ending up creating multiple change request types. Okay. For each change request type, what is the retention period or rest period? That means if you specify here in terms of days, 90 days, that means archiving team in the backend, they schedule the archiving job. Okay. So the archiving job will actually pick up records above 90 days and it will archive those records. It won't touch the records which are less than 90. Okay. So from our side, we need to work with because archiving team not aware of this change request type concept and everything. From your side, your responsibility is to work with the archive business team and come up with some retention or rest time and maintain for each CR type what is your retention period. That's it. Rest everything, the job, scheduling the job and everything will be done by archiving team. Clear? Okay. So if this is clear, the next one that we are going to discuss is workflows. Okay, workflow is also part of your, actually both your change request and workflow both go together. Okay, so any questions till now? So you understood what is the change request type configuration, stepwise configuration, and then all the priorities, reasons, everything that it's a kind of config items that you need to maintain. And we also discussed about little bit around the archiving thing. There is very little scope from our side, from the archiving side, but we have to initiate the discussions. Maybe not immediately. Once you went live, probably as an roadmap item, you need to keep archiving as one of your activity and start discussing with the business as well as archiving team to enable the archiving and try to get the retention periods or rest periods for your respective change request types. Okay, so if this is clear, now we can get into workflow topic. So in workflow, right? So we discussed multiple times how an MDG workflow should look like. Like you will have a typical workflow, different type of workflows like requester, approver one, approver two, and all that stuff. So your data gets actually activated only when the last step, activation step, gets successful. Only that time your data will move, turn into inactive to active, and active data will get stored into active area tables in case of a reuse mode. So that's what. Okay. Now, how to configure the workflows in MDG? Like there are different type of workflows, auto approve, standard workflows are there, configurable workflows are there. In case of configurable workflow, you can configure auto approvers, one step, two step, parallel, sequential. So different type of workflows that you can configure. Okay. Now here, before getting into the workflow topic, there is some two prerequisite configurations that we need to look into that. Okay. So those prerequisite configurations are like the first one is activate event type linkage. Okay. So again, in MDG, SAP provided one business object that is bus 2250. This is the number of the business object. Earlier we discussed BOT and OTC, that is MDG config item. Don't get confused between these two things. It's an identifier which uniquely identifies your master data. That's it. There is nothing technical relevancy for this one. Okay. But what we are going to discuss here is something called business object. So this business object right? Like, I mean, in SAP, we talk about something called business object. Like for APIs, where you can actually, you wanted to expose the APIs to external world. So that's where you can create up the BAPIs or APIs and expose it to the external world, right? So that kind of business object. So for entire MDG, whether you are working on MM or BP or anything, for the entire MDG, SAP provided one business object, that is bus 2250. This is exclusively for MDG processes. Now, what is this business object? How it will helpful for us? That we will discuss. Okay. Now, first, just remember this business object bus 2250. With that information, there is something called prerequisite configuration. These two are the prerequisite configurations that we have to do when you get a fresh MDG system. Okay. So in this one, what is the first one? First one is activate event type linkage. Okay. So when you open this, here you will find different type of business objects in this system level. All these are different business objects, nothing to do with MDG. In this, we wanted to see our MDG business object type is configured or not. So that one you can specify. BO means it's a business object type. The number is bus 2250. Bus 2250 is the business object type for entire MDG, irrespective of your object. Okay. So now when you enter here, you can see there are certain entries. Okay. So these entries should be there. By default, these entries will be there whenever you get a fresh MDG system. It is just to validate. So these entries should be there. In these entries, you can see activated. Okay. So activated means it will trigger one event. That means after all the approvers completed their activity, and once the final approver completes their activity, the workflow that we are going to configure. Okay. So where is that? Yeah. So once approver to approves, right? In the workflow, we initiate some step called activation step. Okay. This activation step, we will link this particular event activated. So that means what happens is that is the time system assumes that, okay, they need to run that activation process. And that activation process means basically turning inactive record to active and moving the data to application specific. That entire logic will get executed. That activation process gets triggered over here. That will happen through this event. So this event should be there over here. If this particular event is not here, then even when you configure in the backend activation step in the workflow, it won't initiate the workflow process. Sorry, it won't initiate the activation process. So this event should be there. In this event in the backend, there will be one function module that is attached to this one. Okay. So this change request finalization. So this function module will initiate the activation process, and that will call your access class save method. From there, your inactive record will turn into active record, and it will move the data to your application specific tables. Okay. So from our side, we just need to validate. So all these are the three different activation things are there. Created means when I'm creating a change request. So that means I go to my material governance. I'll click on create material. Okay. So here, so once I choose this one CR type, we go to continue. Okay. So you enter all the data. Once you enter all the data, you have two options. Either you can basically you need to submit this. Okay. So once you click the submit button, that is the time system initiates it triggers the create event. Okay. So that create event should be there over here. Similarly, rollback. Rollback means at the final, I wanted to roll back or reject this request. Okay. So I wanted to roll back my process, the change request. So in that case, there is a rollback event also will be there. So these are the three events that you need to validate whether these entries are there or not.
If not there,
So if let's say if activation is missing, then what happens? Though in the workflow you assign your activation step, it won't activate. Basically, it will just hang it over there. It won't find that activate event, and it won't initiate the activation process, which means your inactive record will never turn into active. Not only for material, for BP, for material, for customer, vendor, finance objects, for anything activation process, it won't activate any record if that is missing. Okay. Let's say if create is missing, that means though here I click on submit button. Okay. Submit button. it will never go to your next steps. Okay, so that is one. Similarly, rollback is also there. So likewise, these 6, how many? 3 plus 3, 6 plus 1. So these 7 entries should be there. Okay, so this is the first check that you need to do when you get a fresh MDG system.
Just one question. Here we
Yeah.
have the receiver type is different, right? Activated underscore ACS, activated underscore DC.
Let me open this.
25.
Okay, receiver types. This is a standard configuration. All these are the standard ones. So it remains same in every, wherever you find MDG system, these entries remain same. Even there is a configuration guide from SAP also. We will go through that configuration guide. So what are the prerequisites that you need to configure when you get a fresh MDG system? In the configuration guide also, they specify with respect to these workflows. They just validate these entries. Okay. So just ensure that you have these entries. That's the only thing. After that, the next one is configure workflow tasks. Okay. Here, once you open the second, this is also one-time activity. First time. Okay. Once you open that, you need to take this one, application framework, CA MDG AF application framework, and click on this assign agents. Okay. Now here what happens is, first time when you get a fresh MDG system, when you get into this configuration, okay, for all that, these are TS means it's a task. For all the tasks starting with TS, okay, remember starting with TS, that means it will be till here. Don't touch anything with the WS1. Till here, what happens is, wherever you see background task, this value will be there as a background task only. First time when you get an MDG system. Standard SAP itself, they put this value. TS this one, background task. TS this one, background task, like this. But wherever you see general task, here it will be blank. This general task, this will be blank. And this will be blank. Okay. And all these things, other than background task, you will find here blank entry here. This task will be there, but here it will be blank. So till here, so everything will be in blank. Okay. Now what you need to do is, you need to take one of the each one. Let's say, for example, select this one. Okay. Click on attributes button, categorize that as a general task. Initially it will be blank. So you need to select this one, categorize it as a general task, and click on transfer. That means here blank will turn into general task. Same repeat here, same repeat here, here, and then here, and in these three places. So till here, okay, that is again a manual activity that has to be done by the consultant. He has to configure, because basis and no other person will do this configuration. This has to be done by us, either technical or functional. But it's simple. Only till here, wherever you see this blank entry, just select that and categorize and as a general task. That's it. These two things has to be done irrespective of whatever the workflow that you configure use in MDG. You need to do these two activities as a prerequisite for your workflows. Okay. So why we are converting into general task? That let's say, for example, the background task when in your workflow, we will discuss in detail. In the workflow, there will be certain steps where user will take some action. That means once I submit this request, this is the user action. At the requester level, I'm clicking this submit, and it goes to some other person. And that person again open that request and click on approve or reject button. So that means those are where user is taking some action. We call it as a general task or foreground task. Some activities it will happen in the background. That is nothing but your activation process. So your requester, approver 2 are your foreground processes. Activation is something like system programmatically make your inactive record to active record. So it's a background process. So same way here, you will SAP already defined certain activities which has to be run in a background, but there are certain tasks are there. That is nothing but you can see here process change request. Process change request is basically approver, whoever, like, I mean, he will be taking either approve or reject action, right? So that should be a foreground task. It should not be a background task. Okay. Like here, there is one more approve change request. So this is also foreground task. Revise means rejecting the request. It's a foreground task. So that's why wherever it is blank, that indicates that there's supposed to be foreground task, but SAP didn't categorize by default as a foreground. That we have to categorize it as a foreground. Now, how do I know whether it's a background or foreground? So the simple blindly what we can follow is already background tasks are already categorized. Just wherever you see blank space, put general task. That's it. Nothing much. Okay. So those are the two pre-configuration steps that we need to do before we start any workflow in MDG. So with that one, we are good to start about the workflows in MDG. Okay, so I'll stop here and onwards we'll continue our discussion on the workflow. So if you have any questions with respect to your practice session or your UI modeling stuck somewhere, or if you didn't understand some topic till now in data model or UI model or process model, that we can discuss. So are we good till now? All the topics that so far that we discussed. Any questions, any doubts, or probably did you when you're any errors that you are facing when you're doing some practice?
Yeah, I noticed that the CR default number key assignment is getting updated, consumed every time. Even we didn't use that also. Is it like that, or
Can you repeat?
That-
Can you repeat your question? I didn't understand.
that internal key assignment when we are creating a material, even we don't create with that key also, it is getting it is consuming, right?
Yes.
That key.
Yeah.
So it is if we if we click on the create one, it will giving you the next
Internal number.
Yeah, next internal number.
Mm. Yeah. So
So
that is expected behavior only. Why? Because if you look at data model, SAP, let me open that. Why that internal number is coming all the time whenever I click on create material in through MDG UI. Okay. Because for this particular data model, data model, okay, if I go to entity types, material entity, the parent entity, if you select this, double click this entity, the setting here, SAP Ascend is internal key assignment possible. That means it will always propose the internal key. But if you have an external key situation, that you can change the value and enter your external key. That's why all the time it shows that internal, but that is still editable, that field.
so that internal key assignment is being consumed when even we don't use that internal key also.
Yeah. Because standard itself is using. But it's up to you. You can replace that internal key with if you have an external key scenario. Then also it will generate the internal key because of this setting. But what you need to do, you need to remove that and enter an external key.
Okay. Thank you.
Clear? Does it answer your question, sir?
Yes. So how can we, like, if we don't use that internal key assignment, after some time those internal key number range is getting consumed totally, right? So at that time, how can we
You can reset the
reassign?
numbers. You can reset the numbers. So in the number range, you can reset that numbers. So when you reset again, it will start from 0 onwards. Anyway,
Okay.
those internal keys will get wiped off after activation, right? So again, you can reset that number. So there's no issue with that.
Okay.
Is there any possibility to view that internal object, that number range object in this data model?
Yeah.
Where
Yes.
Mhm.
Let me show you. So whatever you are assigning here, internal key, for that one, this is the number range object. So from here only it is generating that whatever $160, whatever you see $200, all that stuff, it is coming from here only.
Okay, so this is the number range object which we can see in the SNRO.
Yeah, you can go to SNRO, you can find from here. See, the current number is 200, right? And we have 200 on this UI. Okay. Yeah. So that's about that. And similarly for change request also, there is the number range object, USMDCRQ.
Okay.
Okay.